Quite like sculpting something from scratch. But you'll need a good grasp of the tools to avoid coming unstuck. So let's get down to it. Maybe Cuthbert will learn something too. Go to the assembly menu. Press the square button to open it if it's closed, and select the modes menu with the X button. Select sculpt mode with X. Its icon has some 3D shapes on it. Every time you enter sculpt mode from the modes menu, a new sculpture will be created. You'll also notice that when you're in sculpt mode, everything outside the sculpture will be blurred and greyed out. This is to help you focus on what you're creating. You can adjust visual feedback in your preferences, which you can find in the options menu. When you first enter sculpt mode, the shapes menu will open automatically and the smear shape tool will be equipped to your imp. Try smearing a shape now by holding R2 and moving your imp around. Now that's out of your system, undo all of it by using the left directional button. By using this tool, we'll help Connie get across the first gap. Move your view a bit closer to the action, looking side on at the space between the platforms. Make sure you can see the platforms and that your imp can reach them. We want to build an organic structure for Connie to walk on, so let's pick an appropriate shape. Select one from the Shapes menu, and you'll see it on the end of your imp. Use the up and down directional buttons to scale it to an appropriate size. While you have a shape on your imp, you can use the grab cam to zoom in and out. Just hold R1 and use the left stick. Now position your imp next to the platform on one side of the gap. Then hold down R2 and use the motion sensor function or the left stick to smear your shape in the gap so that Connie can walk on it. If you want to have another go at it, just undo using the left directional button. Feel free to press and let go of R2 as many times as you want. Each press will create a new edit within your sculpture. Bear in mind that all the edits you make are part of a single sculpture, even if they aren't connected. This means that in assembly mode, they'll behave like a single object. Why not try out different shapes to see what works best? Try holding L2 as you sculpt and use the left and right sticks to rotate the shape.
Tenth row.
Maybe try making something like a rock formation or a tree trunk. The cool thing is, sculptures are automatically physical, so they can be walked on by puppets like Connie immediately. When you want to try it out, switch to play mode in the options menu and get Connie to walk around on your sculpture. When you're happy to move on, go back to edit mode and proceed to the next step.
No, Kyle. If you were to go in, you could just go on your phone and check the fucking schedule. We have too many fucking group chats already. Delete them after she says delete this one. I'm too lazy to. That's why you have fucked up shit, so haha, bitch. Oh, stupid. Huh. I'm gonna do dumb shit. This one's taking I don't even have that skin.
What happens when we want to edit an existing sculpture rather than start a new one? Let's investigate. When we went into play mode, we were taken out of sculpt mode. When you're in assembly mode, scope back into your sculpture. Hover over it with your imp, hold L1 and press X. It's just like scoping into a group. Have a go at it now. Now we're here, let's try editing the shapes you've already made. To move or rotate shapes, unequip the Smear Shape tool by pressing circle. This automatically equips the Move tool. You might notice most of the movement controls in Sculpt mode are the same as in Assembly mode. Grab and move shapes with R2. Rotate them using L2 and the sticks or the touchpad. You can hold L1 and move with R2 to clone your shapes or scale them with the up and down buttons. You can even repeat clone. But unlike Assembly mode, you can't select things with X in Sculpt mode. Now try moving, rotating, and scaling your individual shapes. If you want to smear some more shapes, just go to the Shapes menu and select a shape to sculpt with. Selecting a shape will automatically equip the last sculpting tool you used. Now you can play around at sculpting with different shapes. Don't
I
forget
totally
that you
forgot
can
that
undo
I'm
and
actually
redo
streaming.
at any time.
Yeah.
If you accidentally scope out, you can scope back into your sculpture by hovering over it with your imp and pressing L1 and X. In the next step, I'll show you how to color your sculpture. You've probably noticed by now that all your sculptures are orangey brown, like clay. That's the default color, but you can sculpt with any color you like. If you're in assembly mode, hover over your sculpture with your imp, then hold L1 and press X to scope back into it. Next, head to the Colors section in the Sculpt menu and press X over a color group to see the different shades. Choose a color, any one you like. And as if by magic, the shape on your imp is now the color you chose. Any new shapes you make will be that color, but the old shapes are still brown. Luckily, we can also color shapes after we've created them, using the spray paint tool. Go to the Sculpt menu and open the Tools section with X. Then select the spray paint tool, which has a spray can icon. Now your imp will have an outline of the current shape on its tip. Intersect the shape with your sculpture and you'll see the spray paint color appear on it. Hold R2 to apply the spray paint to the shapes. You can try out different colors and shapes to completely change the look of your sculpture. If you want to make it easier to keep your imp on the surface of the sculpture, you can use the Surface Snap guide. You can find Surface Snap in the Sculpt Guides menu. Select it with X to turn it on. There's a Guides menu in every mode, though not all guides are available everywhere. You can also change the finish of your sculpture using the Finishes menu. The Coat, Style and Effects tutorial has more on finishes if you're curious. By now, you should have an organic looking form, and it will be whatever color your imagination conjured up. If you switched on Surface Snap, switch it off in the Guides menu before continuing. Just select the button with X to turn it off. Then, when you're ready, proceed to the next step. All these smeared shapes are creating one single sculpture, even if there's space between them. But you can also use the smear tool to remove from the sculpture instead of adding to it. To do that, we need to set the tool to subtract. Scope into your sculpture if you haven't already with L1 and X. When the smear shape tool is equipped to your imp, you can press the triangle button to make it subtract. You'll notice that your imp turns into an outline. The shape on your imp becomes an outline too. You can now use the smear tool to cut into your sculpture. Try using different shapes to see what effect they have. For a really cool effect, try subtracting with a different coloured shape on your imp. How good is that? You can switch the tool between add and subtract by pressing the triangle button. Why not play around with the tools a bit and try to make a dramatic or interesting looking form? When you're happy with its shape, go into play mode and see if you can get Connie across it. If you need to edit it, just come back to edit mode via the options menu. Don't forget to scope back into your sculpture using L1 and X. When Connie has successfully crossed the first gap in play mode, switch back to edit mode, then go to the next step. Smearing shapes can be a messy business. Sometimes you just want to create neat sculptures. Luckily, there are ways to do that. So go to the Assembly menu and select Sculpt in the Modes menu. This will create a new sculpture. Now let's practice sculpting an architectural structure over the second gap. To help us build a neater bridge, open the Guide section of the Sculpt menu. In Guides, switch on Grid Snap by pressing X over it. You'll see a number appear next to the button. That's how big the grid squares will be. You'll notice the white dotted grid in the scene. The spacing of the dots shows the tightness of the grid. They will change orientation depending on your point of view. We'll leave it on the default setting for now. You can experiment with it later. Now try making a colourful sculpture using the Smear and Move tools and the Colours menu. This will just be a practice one, so don't spend too long on it. We'll delete it and make an even better one in a minute. You'll notice that it's much easier to keep your shapes neat and straight this time. That's because Grid Snap is active. It makes your tools and objects snap to the grid. It also helps you rotate precisely. Try it out using L2 or the touchpad. With Grid Snap on, objects rotate 45 degrees at a time. You can rotate the shape on the end of your imp before you stamp it, or use the Move tool to rotate shapes that are already placed. When you're comfortable sculpting with Grid Snap, continue to the next step. If we want to make a super neat bridge, there's another guide we can use. If you're still in sculpt mode, scope out of it with L1 and circle. Once you're in assembly mode, delete your sculpture with triangle. Go to the modes menu. Click the sculpt mode button to start a new sculpture. Now we're in sculpt mode, the guides menu will have different options. Open the guides menu and switch on the mirror guide. Don't worry about the 2 additional options. Let's investigate them later. Also, check the grid snap is still turned on. Now select the smear tool in your chosen color and shape. The mirror guide will always center on the first shape you make. That's why we started a new sculpture. Now, move your view so you can see all of the second gap, and your imp can reach it. If you need to, use the grab cam to zoom out a little from the shape on your imp. Now stamp your first shape right in the center of the gap to enable the mirror guide. Then smear your shape from the center over to the edge of the gap where it meets the platform. You'll see that your sculpt is mirrored, so you only have to make half of the bridge, and it'll be nice and symmetrical, leaving you to focus on making it fabulous. Carry on sculpting and carving your bridge until you're happy. Test it in play mode. And when Connie is over the second gap, return to edit mode via the options menu. When you're back in edit mode, switch off the mirror guide. You can also switch off grid snap if you want, before moving on to the next step. Now we need to create a bridge across the last gap. For that, we're going to use the mighty Stamp tool. First, we'll need to create a new sculpture by going to Sculpt mode via the Modes menu. Now that you're in Sculpt mode, make sure you've switched off the mirror guide before you continue. You'll be equipped with the Smear Shape tool by default, so you'll need to switch to the Stamp Shape tool. You can find Stamp Shape in the Sculpt mode Tools menu, next to Smear Shape. Its icon is a simple square. You can quickly switch between the Stamp and Smear tools using L1 and Triangle. Or you can set Stamp Shape to be your default sculpting tool in the My Preferences menu. That way, Stamp Shape will be automatically equipped when you start a new sculpture. Stamping shapes is a bit like stamping objects from the Dreamiverse. With the Stamp Shape tool, you only stamp one shape at a time, no matter how long you hold R2 or X. This has additional benefits too, which you'll see later. Now select the cube in the Shapes menu, then stamp one at the side of the gap. We're almost there, Connie! Open the Sculpt Tools menu again, and this time pick the Stretch tool. Its icon is a double-ended arrow. When Stretch is selected, hovering your imp over a shape will cause an arrow gizmo to appear. Hover over the side of the cube that's facing the opposite platform. Press and hold R2 when the arrow is showing, and use your imp to stretch the shape across the gap. Nice. Let go of R2 when you're done stretching. It's not a very exciting bridge right now, but I've got something great to customize it with soon. You can stretch any shape you've sculpted, regardless of what shape it is. Spheres, cones, and even donuts can be stretched.
You can even stretch subtracted shapes, but only at the points where they intersect with the sculpture.
Have some fun with the Stretch tool, but don't go to play mode just yet. When you're ready to take this bridge and your sculpting skills to the next level, continue to the final step. So far, I've shown you a few ways to edit the shapes you've already sculpted. But there's also a way to edit the shape before stamping or smearing. First of all, make sure you're still scoped into the sculpture. If not, hover over the bridge, hold L1 and press X to scope in. Also, make sure that you're using the Stamp Shape tool and not the Smear Shape. Next, choose a shape from the Shapes menu and select what color you want it to be. Now move the new shape right next to the bridge so that they're touching. Use the grab cam to make sure the shape is in contact with your bridge. Now hold L1 and press square to open the shape editor, just like when you want to tweak something. When you're in the shape editor, you can let go of L1 and the shape will be fixed in place while editing. Notice the Sculpt menu has been replaced with the Shape Editor menu. The buttons vary a little depending on which tool and shape you're using. The Shape Editor for the Stamp tool has quite a few options. We're only interested in one for now, the most exciting one, Soft Blend. The icon is the one with the two circles blending together. If the option isn't there, just check that you have the Stamp Shape tool equipped and not Smear Shape. This is important. Next to the icon, there's a slider and a toggle button. Sliders in the shape editor are round, which may seem unusual, but they work just like the sliders in tweak menus. The blend amount slider affects how much the shape will blend with other shapes nearby. Try holding X on the slider and moving your imp up and down. This is how you get some truly amazing shapes. The hard blend toggle switches between hard and soft blends. Toggle between the two options with X to see the difference it makes. To close the shape editor, just press circle. Now have a play with your blendable shape. You can only blend shapes that are part of the same sculpture. So if you can't see any blending on your shape, scope into the sculpture with L1 and X.
You can make some very cool shapes using blending. Try blending subtracted shapes too.
Experiment with different shapes and blends on your bridge. Make it really fancy. You can jump back into the shape editor with L1 and square. You can use the shape editor in any of the sculpting tools. Try using soft blend with the spray paint tool. To exit the shape editor and return to sculpting, just press circle. When you've got the hang of the shape editor and you're happy with your bridge, try it out in play mode and get Connie to Cuthbert. Take Connie through the door to finish the tutorial.
Okay, I gotta get my motion controllers.
There's nothing quite like sculpting something from scratch. But you'll need a good grasp of the tools to avoid coming unstuck. So let's get down to it. Maybe Cuthbert will learn something too.
Before starting this tutorial, I'd recommend you complete Start Dreaming for motion controllers if you haven't already. It'll get you up to speed with all the basic controls, so you can focus on becoming a sculpting master. First, make sure
Okay.
gonna take a second. I like how like nice and careful
Look at you with your fancy
the motions
motion
are
controllers.
for this.
Looks like you're ready to start wielding them like a first-class dream shaper. In this tutorial, you'll master the basic controls you learned in the home space. But this time, you'll have the full freedom
This
of
is actually
edit mode.
trippy.
Use the video player to play through the tutorial steps. Follow the steps carefully. It's not just about getting to the end, it's the journey that counts.
Oh, this one don't get
So
glasses.
here we are.
This one's
This
just
is where the magic
chilling.
happens. Edit mode. Somewhere in this scene I've hidden a puppet, which we'll need in later tutorials. I've left some clues to help you find it. But before we search for the first clue, let's remind ourselves how to move around using motion controllers.
yes, please, because I don't know
You should
how.
be able to see two imps on the screen, tracking the movement of your motion controllers. If you can't see them, just make sure that you're in front of your PlayStation camera, then hold down the start button on either motion controller until the imps reappear. You can do this at any time to recalibrate your imps if they feel too close, too far away, or off-center. The primary imp is the one with a face. You control this imp with your dominant hand. You can set your handedness in your preferences, which you can find in the options menu.
Yeah, look at me. I'm cool. Yeah. This
Your
gives me
secondary
feels
imp
so
holds
freedom.
the assembly menu. You can
See?
bring it up by holding down the T button on your secondary controller. That's the one underneath that looks like a trigger. Try it now.
So that's
You
how
won't
you
need
look.
it just yet, so go ahead and release the T button to hide it again. Your imps are used to move around the scene in 3D space. Using either controller, press and hold the move button and just twist and tilt the controller a little bit. We call this using the grab cam. Where you grab in space is important, as that's the point your view will rotate around. Now try grabbing with either move button and looking around you. Okay, let's turn back towards the shapes floating on the island. Reach out with your imp, then hold the move button on that controller to grab that point in space. Then, while you hold the move button, pull that controller back towards you to pull yourself forward in the scene.
Aha.
You can do this with either controller, so you can alternate them to pull yourself along. Use the move buttons to grab cam towards those two shapes on that cloud, then push yourself back away from them. You can even move from side to side in a similar way. Be careful not to press both move buttons at the same time. That triggers another function, which I'll explain in a moment. If you do it by mistake, don't worry. Just use your primary X button to press the red button that appears by your secondary imp. When you're comfortable with moving and looking around with the grab cam, you're ready to move on to the next step. Press the arrow button on the video to continue. My first clue is hidden somewhere on this island. We should probably look around these objects and see if we can find it.
To do that, we first need to set our imp reach.
Remember I told you not to press both move buttons at the same time in the last step? Well, now's the time to do just that. Hold your imps so that their tips are either side of the shapes on the cloud. Then tap both move buttons at once. Don't hold them down this time. You'll see a circle with a number in it for a moment. That means your imp reach has changed. You'll notice that very little else will change, but now your imps can easily reach the shapes on the cloud, as if they're at arm's length. That's why we call this maneuver changing your imp reach. Now that you can reach further in the scene, you can easily move around the shapes. Just grab cam onto the shapes and rotate your point of view around them. The point in space where you grab is the point you'll rotate around, so remember to wiggle the imp when you grab cam to check its position. Try that now and look for the clue. Once you've found it, move on to the next step. Did you find that clue? It was on the back of one of those shapes. Looks a bit like a rocket. I do love a cryptic message. Why don't you look around with the grab cam for any rocket-related goings-on? Don't forget to twist and tilt your view a little each time you grab. Ah, look over there, on that island in the distance. Those shapes look a lot like the ones in the clue.
No way.
That's a long way away. Try changing your imp reach to get us there more easily. Hold your imp's tips either side of the target, then tap both move buttons. Now use your extended reach to grab that island and pull yourself over to it. Simple. Now that you're next to it, you'll need to adjust your imp reach again so you can interact with these objects more easily. With your imps on either side of an object, tap both move buttons. If there isn't an object where you need one, just find something at a similar distance and set your imp reach using that. If you get in a kerfuffle, just select the one-to-one imp reach button near the secondary imp, using X on the primary controller. This will reset your imp reach back to the default scale. Changing the imp reach is
like
a powerful
clawing
technique
around.
for navigating scenes. In fact, it's
I just
so
did the
powerful,
backflip.
you could easily get lost in the scene if you accidentally set your imp reach too high. If you do get lost, just hover over the mode icon in the corner of the screen. In assembly mode, the icon is a puzzle piece. Here you'll find a camera bookmark that'll take you back to where you started in the scene. Select it with X and you'll be back in familiar territory. And remember, you can recalibrate your imps at any time. Just press and hold either start button for a couple of seconds. Once you reach the island, make sure you're looking directly at the cylinder and the cone at a sensible distance. When you're ready, move on to the next step. Think back to the first clue. The cone was on top of the cylinder, right? But how can you move them? Well, in edit mode, you interact with everything using your primary imp, the very tip of your imp's pointy part. See how there's an icon in a circle there? That shows you what tool the imp is using. Right now, it's the arrows icon. which means the imp is using the move tool. That's the default tool in edit mode, because editing a scene means moving things around a lot. Let's see the primary imp in action. First, grab the cone. Hover over it with your imp, then press and hold the primary T button. That's the trigger button underneath the controller. Now your imp has grabbed it, simply move the cone by moving the controller. Try to put it on top of the cylinder, just like in the clue.
It is, but this is not the VR.
It's important to remember
they don't
that
have
grabbing
VR
with the
out
T
yet.
button is different to using the grab cam.
They're going to.
When you're using the T button,
I'm just using
you
the
can
move
grab
controllers.
anything, no matter how far away you are, as long as the tip of your imp is hovering over it. You don't have to be able to physically reach it with...
I kind of basically just skipped the whole tutorial.
Okay, thank you.
Think
no
back
problem.
to the first clue.
They're gonna have it out soon, but I don't know when.
Right. Here's the puppet I
I'm basically just clawing like, come here, come here, get over here. Now I gotta climb up here. And then, can I readjust myself? Clawing over here. Okay. And then pause. X. Possess. Heck yeah, brother. Yeah.
Now you've got the hang of moving things around in edit mode, it's time to master manipulating objects. Just as well, because
Yeah.
Connie's friend Cuthbert fell asleep in the Dreamiverse and got stranded. Yes, he's a cube with legs. Connie didn't choose her friends. I did. So, we need to fix these platforms if she's going to reach the flag and get to Cuthbert.
No problem.
Before we fix the platforms, let's switch to play mode to see how a player would experience this scene.
Yeah, I'm not.
Press the start button on either controller to open the options menu. Then select play mode with the... We have to do something about these platforms if Connie's gonna reach the other side. First, let's get a good look at them. Position your imps on either side of the first platform, then set your
tutorial is
imp reach
entertainment.
by
This
tapping
is
both
good.
move buttons at the same time.
Yeah.
Then use
I
the grab
was
cam to
afraid that was
position
gonna
your
get
view
boring.
side on to Connie and the platform.
But it's not too bad.
See the dotted outlines?
And it lets you
That's
skip
where
a
the
lot of it.
platforms
You can
should be.
basically
So let's
not
put them in
watch
place with
it
the move tool.
if you can figure it
The
out.
imp has this equipped by default. To move things, hover the tip of your imp over them and press and hold the primary T button. Move it to where you want it and release the T button. Try it now with that first movable platform.
Resize circle.
You can get a slower, more precise movement if you hold the T button softly. And if you need to try again,
Am I
just
zooming
undo your
in?
action by tilting the primary
Oh,
controller
okay.
to the left and pressing its square button. When the platform is in the right spot, you're ready for the next step.
I don't get it. Okay. There we go. There. I did the whole tutorial all by myself.
Now that the first platform's in position, let's test it out. Open the options menu and select play mode with the primary X button. Connie's on the starting platform, ready for another try. Take control of her with the primary T button and see if she can jump over the gap now. Hope she made it this time. If not, you can always go back and edit things again. In fact, let's try doing that now and see what happens. Select Edit Mode from the Options menu. Look at that. Connie isn't in her starting place anymore. That's because time passes when you're in play mode, and the scene doesn't rewind automatically when you return to Edit Mode. Instead, things will be frozen in the state you left them.
I didn't even know you can move this. I'm gonna move it right here.
But you can easily rewind things. Just open the assembly menu by holding the secondary T button,
over here
then select the rewind button with your primary imp. Make sure you can see the secondary imp as the menu is attached to it. When you press the rewind button, everything that changed in play mode will rewind back to the beginning. Doing this won't reset any changes you made in edit mode. See? Connie is back to her starting position, but the platform remains where you left it. Try to get into the habit of rewinding time after you play scenes. That way, you'll avoid any problems. There are times when it's useful to leave things as they are after playing, but when in doubt, rewind. Okay, if your platform's in the right place and you've had a successful test run with Connie, you can move on to the next step. Let's sort out the next platform now. It's the middle one that's lying on its side. Before you can match it up with the outline, you'll need to stand it upright. You can rotate objects in edit mode by grabbing them with the primary T button and rotating the controller. Give it a go now. You don't have to turn it all the way in one go. Simply let go of the platform and grab it again once you've turned it as far as your wrist will comfortably allow. Bear in mind that your imp's tip is at the center point of the rotation, so you can grab the platform at different points and see how it affects the rotation. All that rotating has made the platform a bit wonky, so let's undo all that by tilting the primary controller left and pressing its square button. Grab and hold
they don't
the
have too
primary
much
T
details
button
on
with
it.
your imp
You
over
should.
the platform
It shouldn't be
and
actually
try to
limited.
rotate it into a vertical
From
position.
what I know.
Once you have it more or less upright,
I
you
think
can let
the
go
only
of the
limiting
T button.
factor is
Then grab it again.
if people
but
make
just
their
lightly press the
levels
T button so
VR
you can nudge it
compatible.
precisely into the matching
And
outline.
that's just up to the player.
That's quite a lot of buttons to remember, isn't it? Well, if you ever forget what to press, just look at the prompts around your imp. Or select the mode icon in the top left of the screen with your primary X button. They'll show you what buttons you can use in any situation. Select the mode icon again to hide the list if it gets in the way. Practice grabbing and rotating things with the primary T button until you're comfortable. Then move on to the next step.
I always watch with the DualShock controller, so that's why I'm skipping it. Alright. I think I'm gonna find character creation.
Connie's hosting a talent contest to find the best characters in the Dreamiverse. But she's a no-nonsense judge, and none of these candidates are up to scratch. Of course, Cuthbert's no use, so let's see if we can come up with something to impress her. Head into the dressing room, also known as edit mode, to get started. In this tutorial, we'll be customizing the appearance of a puppet. So we'll need a blank canvas to start. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Gadgets menu. Now open the Gameplay Gear menu. In here, find the Blank Puppet Deluxe. The deluxe version is the perfect starting point for making characters. Select it with X and a blue mannequin will appear on your imp. It has built-in features like jump and possession animations, which the basic version doesn't have. Connie won't be impressed by a basic puppet, so make sure you select the right one. Stamp the deluxe puppet in the scene with R2 or X. Get its feet roughly on the floor, but make sure they aren't intersecting with it. Then press the circle button to unequip the puppet from your imp. If you need to, you can grab and adjust the puppet with R2. In the next step, we'll start exploring the puppet's inner workings. The puppet might look simple, but it's quite a complex gadget. So let's get to know it a little better. It's made up of many objects that have been grouped together. And just like any other group, it can be scoped into.
Yes, sir.
Hover over the puppet with your imp, press and hold L1, and then press X to scope in. Below the puppet, you will now see its base and its logic microchip. If they're obscured by the floor, you may need to scope out and adjust your puppet's position. The puppet's body is made of sculptures, joined together with connectors. When scoped in, we can grab parts of the puppet to change its pose. Before we do that, find the button called Puppet Mirror in the context menu. Select this button with X, and your puppet will stay symmetrical when you pose it. Of course, you don't have to make it symmetrical, but it's a good way to start. You can always add nuance later. When you move a part of the puppet, all the parts connected to it will also move. The root of the puppet is the pelvis, and every other part is connected in a hierarchy from there. For example, moving the upper arm will move the lower arm and the hand as well. But if you move the pelvis, the whole puppet will move. Its feet will try to stay in contact with the floor. So if you lower the pelvis, the puppet's knees will bend. You can also rotate parts by grabbing them with L2. Use R2 and L2 to create a new pose for the puppet. Changing the pose can be a great starting point for a character. The pose could be confident, sad, scared, or aggressive. Don't forget, you can undo any changes with the left directional button if you make a mistake. Use the grab cam to adjust your pose from different angles. Just hold R1 over the puppet to activate it. When you've finished posing your puppet, move on to the next step. Now we've posed our puppet, we can start adjusting its proportions. To do that, we're going to use the stretch tool. Go to the Assembly menu, then open the Tools menu. Select the Stretch tool. It's the one that looks like a double-ended arrow. The Stretch tool works like the Move tool in a lot of ways. But with the Stretch tool, you can move parts of the puppet beyond the limits of the connectors. Try grabbing and moving the puppet's head. Notice the way the neck elongates and shortens. Now try it on the hands. This changes the length of the upper and lower arm. Some body parts respond differently to the stretch tool. For instance, if you move the upper arms, the shoulders will broaden and the chest will expand. You can also scale parts of the puppet using the up and down directional buttons. I'd only recommend doing this to the puppet's extremities though, the head, hands and feet. Puppets are delicate contraptions, and extreme scaling and stretching can make them behave unexpectedly. But if anything does go skew-whiff, just undo it using the left directional button. If you know how to use sculpt mode, you could try scoping into the individual body parts to change their shape. You can find a whole tutorial on sculpting in the art tutorials. Have a play around with stretching and scaling and see what you can create. Try making the puppet more cartoony or turn it into a monster. Test out your puppet in play mode to see it in motion. When you're done, return to edit mode. Rewind time with L3 to get your puppet back in position. In the next step, I'll show you how to color and stylize your puppet. Another way of customizing your puppet's appearance is by changing its color. We can do this by tinting it in coat mode. If you've played my tutorial on coat, style and effects, you'll already know how to do this. In the Assembly menu, go to the Modes menu and enter Coat mode. In the Coat Mode menu, open the Colors menu and select a color for your puppet. Now hover over your puppet and hold R2 to tint it with your selected color. The longer you hold R2, the stronger the tint will become. If you want your puppet to be multicolored, simply scope into the puppet. Select a different color from the Colors menu. Hover your imp over a part of the puppet you want to tint. How about the head? Now, when you press and hold R2, just that part of the puppet will be tinted. You can also use the tools in Style Mode and Effects Mode. Try using Style Mode to change the texture of your puppet. If you don't know how to use Style Mode, there's an art tutorial which can help you. In the next step, we'll dive into the dressing up box.
He's just looking at you like, yo, I'm telling you, this is a dope game. Like,
He's on his head.
I was trying to make it like a lizard shape. I'm getting used to the controls, so I'm like, yo, check me out, yo. Check me out. Check me out, yo. I can't see myself in the mirror. How dare you? Ugh. That's funny. Cha 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 cha. Hmm.
What is this? Emoji happy tears.
This is dreams, dog. And this is some character I'm messing with. I'm testing the character creation. Alright, let me see here. Let's put some grids back on. Where is it again? I forgot what to do, I forgot. Aha. He's looking more like a frog than a lizard right now.
What is this game about?
Dude, I can't explain this game, bro. This game is whatever you want it to be, dog. You can do anything you want. You can create anything you want. You can play anything that people make. It's pretty crazy. Looseness.
Sorry I cannot long stay here. See you in next live stream.
Alright. Bye-bye. Now we got the tail. Look at him. War. Bruh. He be hiding some pizza? Man, I can't control this thing. Yeah. Yes. Trying to get him to eat this pizza. Just puts his whole face in it.
One of the simplest ways to customize a puppet is by adding accessories. But to make sure they move with the puppet, we need to group them with a body part. Before we do that, it's important to fully understand the concept of scoping in and out of groups and objects. If you've played part 4 of the Start Dreaming tutorials, then you'll already know a thing or two about using groups. Objects in dreams are often combined into groups, which can be treated like a single object in assembly mode. Groups themselves can also be grouped. This means that you can have groups nested inside other groups. Let's try scoping in and out of something else before we invade the puppet's personal space. Over there on the floor is a hat box. Make sure you're in edit mode. Now try taking the lid off the hat box. The whole box will move because the lid, the box, and its contents have been grouped. Undo the move with the left directional button to put it back in its place. Now scope into the group. Hover over the hat box, press and hold L1 and press X. Everything but the box should go grey and blurry. If not, make sure your visual feedback preference is set to all. This shows that you've scoped into the group and can edit its contents. Now, you should be able to take the lid off the hat box. Inside is another hat box. Try taking the lid off this one. I think you can guess what will happen. This smaller hat box is also grouped with its lid and contents. Remove the smaller box and place it next to the large one. Now scope into this group by holding L1 and pressing X over the smaller hat box. The original hat box will go grey and blurry as we've scoped into a subgroup. Now you should be able to open the smaller hat box. What's inside? A lovely hat. Take it out and place it next to the smaller box. When you've done that, proceed to the next step.
This is gonna be one buff guy. That's kind of cool. I'll mess with more stuff like that later.